Primary day in Illinois is less than 2 weeks away, and the races are heating up. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. It is political season, as always in Illinois, but closer than ever now with less than 2 weeks to go before the primary. With me today to talk about some issues in the campaign, Charlie Wheeler is back. He is director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. That's been only about 20 years, and he was a longtime Sun-Times reporter at the Capitol before that. Welcome back, Charlie.
Thank you, Bernie. It's always fun to be here.
And Dave Dahl is here, who works morning, noon, and night, I believe, and pre-dawn as well in his job, State House reporter for WTAX Radio. Welcome back, Dave.
And I, too, enjoy being here. It's fun.
It is fun. Well, let's talk about the state of the races. You know, obviously, Governor Rauner for a long time. He's a first-term Republican. He's been spending millions of dollars attacking Democrats, a Democrat, J.B. Pritzker, to try to move the needle on the other side. But he's also spent a lot of time in recent weeks, or a lot of money in recent weeks, advertising against his more conservative Republican opponent, State Representative Jeannie Ives of Wheaton, who has said that she doesn't like particularly some of the decisions the governor has made on social issues, including signing a bill to allow expanded Medicaid funding of abortion, taxpayer funding of some abortions. And he has been running an ad saying that Jeannie Ives is probably Mike Madigan's favorite Republican because she used the name Madigan in particularly one interview that Rauner and Ives did before the Chicago Tribune editorial board. And she says, Governor, just attacking Mike Madigan won't get your stuff done. And so quotes like that from her end up in Rauner ads. Now, there's a group called PolitiFact Illinois, which is associated with the Better Government Association now. They said that Jeannie Ives really isn't an ally of Madigan, and the rating of true to false was the most false the most false on that meter is pants on fire, and they rated Rauner's ads pants on fire. That was a few days ago, and I'm still hearing those ads. I see them on TV. I hear them on radio, including in the expensive market in Chicago. Charlie, does it matter to a Rauner that somebody says his ads are inaccurate?
No. Why should it matter when people say that his ads are pants on fire? What the object is, it's not to be honest, it's not to be accurate, it's not to be factual. The object is to portray your opponent in as unfavorable a light as possible. So he says that Jeannie Ives is like a tool of Mike Madigan. The irony is, the reason Jeannie Ives is running for governor is because of those bills that you mentioned. The one you mentioned, the expansion of Medicaid and state health employee insurance to cover abortion, and a second bill that Ives says is a sanctuary bill, in that it limits interactions between law enforcement and people who may not be here with the proper documentation. And both of those bills were supported by Mike Madigan. So by that calculus, Bruce Rauner is more a tool of Mike Madigan than Jeannie Ives. But again, the pants on fire, and this is a rating. PolitiFact has these, what would you say, fact-checking operations in all across the country, and usually they're with some major newspaper. In our case, it's with the BGA, the Better Government Association in Chicago, and they just look at, here's what the guy said, here's what the actual facts are, and sometimes they say, yes, he's correct. Other times they say, he's mostly wrong. And then they say, this is flat out nonsense, and that's the pants on fire. This isn't the first time the governor's got this. He regularly gets them for claiming he's introduced balanced budgets. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter for the governor. His object is to make Jeannie Ives as unpalatable as possible to Republican primary voters.
And we'll see where that goes. Dave, I find it interesting that one of the things the governor says in that ad is that she's taken thousands of dollars from a labor group that supports Madigan. Shady.
Yeah.
And what it turns out is I think it's Operating Engineers Local 150. It's a union and employer group, and they have given also many thousands of dollars to Republicans, including Jim Durkin, the leader of the Republicans in the House, and Jeannie Ives only got less than $7,000 from them, whereas the governor has, his campaign has now, over the last couple of years, spent $95 million, or at least put it in the bank.
You could also argue, too, that the governor did very little to stop the increase, the income tax increase, from going into effect last year. He didn't hold the Republican caucus together. He immediately vetoed it, so it could immediately be overridden out of 4th of July convenience. So that would be another thing where you could argue that it's the governor and not Representative Ives who's helping out the Speaker and the Democrats.
Let's briefly talk about the Democratic side of things. Just J.B. Pritzker has spent, I guess he's put more than $60 million into his own campaign now. This is rather unprecedented.
I think it was $63 million, but who knows what's happening as we're speaking now.
Right. And that's just in the primary. So J.B. Pritzker, of course, lives in Chicago. He is an heir to the Hyatt Hotel family. He's other businesses, he's got investment businesses and factories and things that he has run and started a business incubator in Chicago. But he has been advertising for a year, but he's gotten in various troubles over time, including the tapes that the Chicago Tribune has made available of him talking back in 2008 with then Governor Rod Blagojevich, who's now in jail. And Pritzker didn't do anything that we know of illegal, but talked about being named to a state post. And talked about which African American would be best for that governor to name to U.S. Senate when there was an opening, in terms that even Pritzker says was not my best day.
Yeah, the least offensive.
Yes, yeah. He said that about his longtime friend Jesse White. So anyway, you've had movement at times in polls from a couple of the other candidates, Democratic side, State Senator Daniel Biss of Evanston and Chris Kennedy of the Kennedy family. His father was late Robert F. Kennedy, and he lives in Kenilworth and is building buildings downtown Chicago, used to run the Merchandise Mart. Kennedy and Biss was up for a while. Kennedy seems a little up for a while. Pritzker's still in the lead. Dave, how's it looking?
Well, if the season were to end today, you'd have to think it would be Pritzker. I mean, he's been in the lead in the polls the whole time. He's got advertising out there, out the proverbial wazoo. But, the way you read the tea leaves, maybe Biss and or Kennedy are eating away at the lead. We'll find out election night. One thing I find interesting, too, is that apparently there are quite a few Democratic ballots in the early voting, much more so than there are Republican, and I don't know exactly why that is. One hypothesis I'd have is that people might be interested in the Democratic races for governor and attorney general. The Republican races for those two spots probably aren't all that close, most people would think.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, Charlie?
I would suggest that you always have to take these polls with a grain of salt. And I won't get into it now, but I can cite instances where the polls were totally out of the ballpark compared to the actual results. I think one of the key things is who is actually going to show up on March 20th. Now, there's a lot of early voting, but still the majority of voters vote on the primary election day.
Which is March 20th.
Yeah, that's when I'll vote, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And the key to success is having an organization that will bring your voters to the polls. Make sure that the people you know support you, and the people who may have said to the pollster, yes, I'm going to vote for J.B. Pritzker, I'm going to vote for Daniel Biss, I'm going to vote for Chris Kennedy, Bob Diber, whoever. You want to get them to the polls. So who's got the better ground operation? Pritzker has the advantage of having the regular Democratic organization in Chicago behind him. He's got the AFL-CIO, other unions. He's got the network, the Democratic network with him in most areas of the state.
Right. Although the state Democratic Party hasn't endorsed, although
no.
All the other candidates say Mike Madigan, chairman of the state party, is really for Pritzker. Madigan
but that's
has never formally said that.
What kind of ground troops do you have? And Pritzker appears to have been almost everywhere in the state, and he does a ton of different things. And I don't think either Dan Biss or Chris Kennedy has that kind of a ground operation in place, and sometimes that's what makes the difference on election day.
I live in Springfield. I've gotten calls at our house from someone for Biss and calls at our house a couple times from someone for Pritzker. I know they're phone banking, but Pritzker, as you say, Charlie, part of this way he is trying to get that grassroots thing working for him, he's opened, I believe it's 15 or more regional offices for his campaign across the state. Again, he This is running, I'm the middle class candidate. Kennedy says those guys are, part of the elite. Kennedy also has put more than $1 million into his own campaign, but nothing like Pritzker. And Pritzker is one of those people on the Forbes list. He's one of the richest people in Illinois. He's worth like $3.5 billion, which is a lot. And yet,
so $63 billion is a drop in the bucket.
Which is interesting because people compare him to Governor Rauner. Governor Rauner is worth, I think, on a good day, depending on the markets, about $1 billion.
Yeah.
Pritzker is more than 3 times that, and yet they've both put in their campaigns. Now, Rauner continues to go online and raise small amounts of money from people. Give us your $10, whatever, be helpful. Pritzker has said from the start, I'm not taking money from anybody else, I'm only funding myself, which I've never seen before in Illinois, and I don't know if it works out well, but when you say you're beholden to no one, that's true. On the other hand, Biss would say, can you buy the election? So you can look at it in many different ways. And that's one of the reasons some people think the labor unions or other Democrats like Pritzker, because clearly he's not going to take their money to run his campaign. He's got enough on his own. Mm-hmm. So that's just a whole different thing. We'll see within 2 weeks how that works. In the middle of all this, we have issues. The legislature has been meeting in the wake of the terrible shooting at a high school in Florida a few weeks ago. Illinois lawmakers in both chambers have been talking about gun control measures, which is more traditional Illinois than has, been shown in some recent years. And the one bill that has passed both houses and gone to the governor because it had been through the Senate and then it passed the House after this Florida high school shooting is one that would have the state license gun shops. And Governor Rauner has not said if he will sign that. Jeannie Ives, siding with the NRA side of things, says, she voted against it and it shouldn't be signed because it's too much regulation. Federal authorities already license gun dealers, but the state licensing would be more severe. Is being pushed strongly by people like Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago. Mm-hmm. All 50 aldermen signed a letter that Rahm Emanuel delivered to the governor at an event they were both at the opening of an AT&T call center in Chicago. The governor was asked about it there. Basically said he wants to protect schools. He wants to ban bump stocks, which are that mechanism.
That's Vegas.
Used in the Las Vegas shooting, basically a machine gun. But he wouldn't say if he would sign this gun regulation bill. And I know we've predicted, I think, here before that he won't do it before the primary. Should he, or will he? What do you think we're going to get here, Dave?
Who knows? We couldn't really predict what he'd do with House Bill 40.
The abortion bill.
The abortion bill, which he signed after saying he wouldn't. And trying to get the governor pinned down on anything is a fool's errand. He starts by saying, I've been crystal clear the whole time, and then he diverts to some other topic that may or may not be related, and then comes back and says, well, I've been clear all along, I'm in favor of safety or something like that. So we have no idea what he's going to do.
Yeah, I think in a way it's kind of naive to actually expect him to take a stand before the primary, because he wants to have it both ways. He wants to not do anything to further alienate the more conservative part of the Republican primary vote, the people who are inclined towards Jeannie Ives. Were he to say, I'm going to sign this bill, that would flip some people who are maybe in the middle over to Ives. On the other hand, he doesn't want to say that he's going to veto the bill, because in the long run, I believe he'll wind up signing it. He'll be looking, once he's passed the primary, now how do I position myself to appeal to suburban women, to people who are maybe buying into my notion that Mike Madigan is evil incarnate, and so therefore all the Democratic candidates for governor are actually tools of Mike Madigan. So if you want to spare the state from death and destruction, vote for me. And he doesn't want on his record that he's gone against this gun control measure. He wants to be more of a centrist candidate. So that's why I say he won't do anything before the election. After the election, he'll sign it.
Right, but we don't know that because he hasn't said that.
No, I know. Yeah. I'm just speculating, right. But I bet on it.
Okay.
Could you imagine Ives winning the primary and Rauner having to spend 10 months as a lame duck?
We've experienced that before. When Dan
Walker his one
was
term
beaten in 1976 by Mike Hollett, then Secretary of State, and basically the first Mayor Daley took him out. Walker was a lame duck, and he was a lame duck in the very truest sense of the word, in that he was irrelevant. The Republicans and Democrats in the legislature work together to pass a budget, to do everything as though the governor didn't exist.
Yeah, well, it would be
Now, Dan Walker
interesting
he was not a billionaire.
Right. It's interesting, though, because just like, and he was a Democrat, but
Walker was.
but just like Governor Rauner, he raged against the Chicago machine, the corrupt Chicago machine that he was going to take on and take out. That's a long time ago. That was what he lost that in, was it 76?
He was beaten in the primary of 1976.
Right, that's what I thought. Time does move on. Well, we mentioned Speaker Madigan, and we should say that problems that have emerged in Democratic Party organizations that he runs, where a couple of people had to be let go recently from operating with those groups because either sexual harassment of fellow campaign workers or bullying of people, including a state rep in one case. And House Speaker Madigan is continuing to deal with this. Some people have called for him to step down as party leader or even as Speaker of the House. He has said he is not going anywhere, but did issue a warning this last week to his members, making sure that they don't harass staff because the staff looks at them as bosses. One of the women who has been involved in this situation, her name is Elena Hampton. She had complained while working on a campaign in Northern Illinois about someone named Kevin Quinn, who was brother of an alderman. Kevin Quinn was then, after a period of time, removed from working for Madigan in state work or political work. But she said she thinks this warning that Madigan gave to his members this last week was more about self-preservation than about protecting women. That's certainly how she feels. Is this going to go away, this Me Too movement and Mike Madigan, or is this just a continuing story for a while, Charlie?
Oh, I think it'll be a continuing story for a while because I really do believe that the atmosphere and the environment has changed. And from my perspective, it's changed for the better. The kind of stuff that guys could get away with, say, 20 years ago, is not acceptable any longer. And 20 years ago, the guy would do it and think, oh, this is okay, and she doesn't say anything, so she must be okay with me hitting on her all the time and chasing her around. And the woman was appalled and repulsed, but she was also fearful. I can't say anything, or I'll lose my job, or I'll lose my livelihood, or I'll lose these connections that I need to advance in my career. One of the things I find interesting is people have been critical of Madigan that he's not done enough, that he hasn't released the names of the people who filed these complaints, and he hasn't fessed up about the political operation. It's all about the state government operation. Yet on the other hand, none of the other legislative leaders have formally released anything. They all say that they don't tolerate it, but no one has come out with the documentation to the same extent that Madigan has. And I can guarantee you from my years, and you referenced the fact I covered the legislature, I did it for 24 years. Behavior was not exhibited solely by House Democrats. And as a matter of fact, without getting into names, one of the memorable occasions when there was almost a fist fight between two Republican representatives because one of the obnoxious ones had been hitting on the other guy's wife. So, what would you say, so disrespectfully?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it crosses party lines is what, yes, understood. And we'll see where that goes. And I know, Dave, some legislation is being forwarded to make it more clear what rights are of victims and what they can report and who to report to. So I assume we'll see more about this as the session goes on because it's a hot topic nationally also.
Well, the House Task Force on Sexual Harassment hasn't heard from Julie Porter, and I think that's a bone of contention, the legislative inspector general.
Right, the one who's put in after 3 years.
They haven't really gotten...
with no inspector general overseeing the legislative branch.
They've just kind of gone around in circles, I think, on defining what the meaning of is or something like that. And they haven't gotten, I don't think, really into the meat of what it's really supposed to be about and what's really going on. And I think that's disappointing to some. And so you have the folks like Ms. Hampton and Ms. Rothheimer saying, well, they're not doing enough, and et cetera, and whether what they're saying is really how it is, or if those are just dissatisfied folks, I can't tell from here.
Yeah. And of course, Denise Rothheimer is the person who complained that she was inappropriately contacted, basically mostly by computer and telephone, by Cyrus Silverstein, state senator, who's running for re-election. And the new inspector general found that he had not done sexual harassment, but had acted inappropriately for a senator just by, it's probably not good to Facebook people at midnight and talk anything on a personal nature.
Looking at the Facebook messages, I mean, he's certainly guilty of being stupid.
Yeah.
And
Indeed.
whether she
well,
is
and his
too,
wife
I'll
is a
leave for you.
Chicago alderman, so I'm sure he's heard about this at home.
You would
No
hope
kidding.
so. And I'm maybe old-fashioned and, I'm, what would you say, a prude in this sense. But to me, if you're single, yeah, then you can be playing these cutesy, lovey-dovey, flirty games with some woman on the internet. Once you're married, that stuff stops. That's all past tense.
From your mouth to everyone's ears at the Capitol.
Well, yeah, I mean, to me that's a very basic thing. You
Sure.
make a commitment to your partner that you are, well, maybe in this day and age, maybe you don't make it a commitment that you're exclusive. But typically you'd say that, I love you, you love me, we hope that we'll be together for eternity. And you don't go out looking for action on the side.
True.
That's, that's my belief.
Understood. There's some truth in that. Let's talk about something else with truth in it, truth in hiring. And Dave, you and I were both at a news conference. State Representative, formerly, Comptroller Susana Mendoza, with members of the legislature with her, is talking about a truth in hiring bill, and it has to do with the governor's office, this governor and past governors. Basically, she's saying if the governor's office has people working for it, they should be paid by the governor's budget and not by agency budgets, which is called offshoring. So they put out a graphic that basically the governor is now has 44 staffers paid by his own $4.9 million budget, but reporting to the governor and working for the governor are 58 other staffers who cost the state $5.5 million a year.
That'd be a majority.
And they're on other budgets, like working for the Department of whatever.
The main example
Yeah.
here in
Yes.
the Rauner administration was when he hired a Secretary of Education named Beth Purvis, who's no longer with the state. She's moved on. But when she was working for the state, her salary was $250,000, and it was budgeted under the Department of Human Services.
Right, which means, as these representatives and senators there said, that means Human Services had less money to spend on its programs because the governor took up $250,000 of their budget.
And it allows the governor to say, the budget of the governor's office in my administration is less than my predecessors. But speaking of predecessors, they've all done it. And what they want to do is stop this governor from doing it and stop future governors from doing it. It just so happens that Bruce Rauner's governor, while this group of mostly Democrats, in fact, I looked at the co-sponsor list, there's only one Republican in either the House or Senate as a co-sponsor, and it's David McSweeney, who is not a fan of the governor. So
he's actually been quite vocally for Representative Ives for governor, and he calls Bruce Rauner the failed governor now. So, and he's very much a fiscal conservative, so he doesn't come at it like the Democrats. And
I'd be slightly more impressed if they had someone who is an ally of the governor saying, I support this bill, and they've yet to do that.
Yeah, and Charlie, you weren't there, but easy to figure. Susana Mendoza said, I hope the governor just gets behind this as good government. We're not saying it's just him. We're saying it's Democrats in the past that did the same thing. We want to stop this offshoring so that the appropriations process for the agencies will mean something. When the legislature says that, one department DCFS should get so much money to take care of kids, they'll have it, and the governor isn't taking some of that. Now, the governor's office, when I've asked about certain people working for them but paid by other agencies, they say, well, the whole big everybody works for the governor in a sense because it's all his administration. Will that hold, or do you think legislature will get this bill to this governor this time? And
I suspect they will.
Would he sign it or veto it, do you think?
Yeah, this is the kind of bill that, in my judgment, has a twofold value. One, it's good government, fiscal responsibility, and two, it's an opportunity to take a political hit at the governor. And so if the bill comes to the governor, what does he do? Does he say, yes, I'm for fiscal accountability, and I agree that we should have this stuff reflect what really is happening? Now, Beth Purvis, connection between education and human services, that's kind of tenuous. Dan Walker did it, 40 years ago? Pat Quinn was one of these offshored people, worked for the governor's office. He was on somebody else's payroll.
And so they called him a ghost payroller
Back
in
then,
the day.
yeah. But a what would you say, a more reputable ghost payroller, because he's actually doing work for the paycheck. But it does go against the notion of fiscal accountability, the notion of being able to actually ascertain where is the money going, what's it being spent for. And so the governor could say, yes, I'm for it because it's fiscally sound, and he'd win some points that way.
There you go. Well, we're almost to the end today, but Dave, you were also at another event this week where at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library there was the unveiling by the U.S. Postal Service of a new the Illinois Forever Statehood stamp. It kind of marks the 200th anniversary of our state, which became a state in 1818, and it's kind of blue, and it's got kind of a sun rising through it in a graphic way. Were you moved when they moved the curtain and unveiled the new stamp?
I think we've seen that logo. The sun is rising from Cairo and sending the golden rays northward. If you have to have a stamp to send cards and pay bills with, which I still do, I know Charlie does, you might as well have an Illinois bicentennial stamp. And I thought it was a nice event.
Yeah, and also on the bicentennial, the state has been running this online poll of the top 10 this and that, and there were several movies from Illinois. What's the best Illinois-based movie? And the Blues Brothers beat out Ferris Bueller's Day Off. With that, I think we'll leave it, because it's good to be happy in campaign season. With that, Charlie Wheeler and Dave Dahl, thanks for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.